Hey guys, this is Nostalgia. So today we're going to be taking a look at my Charge Strike Javazon. Now this isn't your traditional Javazon build. This is a purely Charge Strike focused build. I'll throw the occasional Fury if there's a group of mobs like over a river, just somewhere I can't reach with Charge Strike, but I rarely have to. There's a few areas where you might want to do that, like in Frozen River and that little pathway area right before the Chaos Sanctuary, between the waypoint and the sanctuary itself. There'll be a few occasional instances like that. Actually, I don't even think that normally happens in the area between the waypoint and the sanctuary. Alright, well, either way, I'm gonna show you the gear and the skills, and then we're gonna check out a little Chaos run. Now, I want to explain first that this build is focused on running high-level areas on player 7 difficulty. So it's supposed to be quite tanky and deal some pretty decent damage even on player 7. It's not intended as a magic find build. This build has very low magic find. Kind of like my Travencall video, if you have some boots with the resistances you need, like 30 faster run walk, and also say 25 magic find, you could use those to try to make up for this lack of magic find. There's a few places where I use charms that don't really have much except for life. Not really a lot. Like this charm right here with life and some mana. This charm with life and poison damage, life and mana. You could replace those sorts of charms like this with 7 Magic Find charms if you want a more Magic Find focused version of this build. But to start with the gear, with the Merc gear, using mainly Charge Strike, the vast majority, like a traditional Fury build, the vast majority of your damage is going to be lightning damage, so it makes sense using Infinity on your Merc if you can afford it. If not, probably a Reaper's Toll is what you would want to go with if you don't have an Infinity. I would recommend a Fortitude and a Vampire Gaze. If you use Guardian Angel and Kira's, or say Guardian Angel or ummed Vampire Gaze rather, to hit 90 all res on your Merc, that would probably work decently well also. But I prefer Fortitude and Vampire Gaze just for the amount of tanking that allows for, given that I mainly focus this build on, like I said, high-level player 7 areas. For the main gear, I usually run this build in Chaos, much more than anything else. So I use a Lane of Hands, along with, well, there's a number of reasons I use Chains of Honor, but it has damage to demons also. Now, if you're running mainly areas, if you're not running Chaos a lot, if you're running mainly, say, Act 5 areas like Worldstone Keep, Frozen River, and the other ice caves, then you could use some gloves like this, 220 gloves, ideally with higher lifesteal. I can't remember if these things can roll, these crafted gloves can roll higher than 3, but also with resistances if you need them. Mana Steal is great too. This build can have a little bit of an issue with mana. Although the way I have it set up, I only have to use like a few a few mana potions per chaos run usually. I'm using Thunderstrokes. As far as I'm aware, you would really only want to use Thunderstrokes, F-Titans, or 640 Jabs. I don't have 640 Jabs. They might actually be more effective for this Charge Strike focus build than Thunderstrokes. I can imagine things, since I don't have F-Titans, so I can't actually test this myself, but I could imagine that Thunderstrokes are still better for this than F-Titans because they have that 15 IAS and minus 15 enemy lightning resist. Okay, I also use a Storm Shield with a facet in it, because since your Charge Strike is a close range melee skill, so you're going to be taking a fair bit of hits unless you get less, but much less so if you get max block which is what I go for on this build. That's part of why I've used the Storm Shield, but also a huge reason for this is the damage reduced by 35%. I also put a facet on it for more damage. I use the Chains of Honor. Its skills are damage, and this basically has everything you would want almost. Damage to demons and undead. Now, if I'm not mistaken, the undead in the Chaos Sanctuary that have lightning immune before or rather, the enemies in the Chaos Sanctuary that have lightning immune before conviction are undead, so you do use that a fair bit, that damage to undead. Lifesteal is great for this build since it's close range. Damage reduced similarly. You get 43 damage reduce with this build. Pretty sick. All res 65, that saves you from having to get a bunch of 15 all res charms and having to get like tri-res boots and a crazy crafted amulet or whatever you would need to make up that res. Okay, I use alders as it has, well, really just for the run walk, the life, and the fire res. Now, if I'm not mistaken, that life does get affected by battle orders, which I do use on this build, just because it's in close range with difficult enemies. Okay. And also 40 faster run walk is great for a Javazon. Now there is, you could consider using an Enigma on this build. However, you would have to change around quite a lot to make up for the lack of all resistances. You would probably want to change out some of these, like life and mana, like I have here and there. For an all-res charm, you would probably replace the Geeds with an all-res charm, and you'd probably want to replace those alders with something better than this. This is the closest to that I have to what you would want, which are boosts with 30 faster run walk, 10 faster hit recovery, and tri-res. Now, if you're not using a mantled heal, or rather, if you're not using a ring that has 7 or more mana steal, which I'm not even sure if rare rings can spawn more than 7, then you'd probably want to not use alders or tri-res boots, but instead silkweave to help out your mana supply. Because these are legit boots for this build. It's just that if you can have some mana steal to not have to use these and not have to chug a ton of mana potions, I just prefer that gameplay, to be honest. I prefer not having to chug a ridiculous amount of mana potions, okay? Now, this seems ridiculous. I'm using a mantled heal, right? But I need this I need this mana steal and the regen mana, because otherwise I just chug and chug potions. These ideally you would have a dual steel ring with resistances if you need them. Okay. So these are the closest things I have to that, and I've tested out some of these, and I just prefer the mantled heal. It gives me the fact that it has 7 mana steal and 20 regen mana just makes it more worth it than these in this case, because I don't need more resistances anyway. If you don't need to make up that mana for whatever reason, then you could use a Soj here, I guess, if you have one. But having a lot of mana for this build is pretty useful. Well, having a decent amount of mana, like 600 plus after bow, more ideally, especially if you don't have that mana steal. I'm using a High Lords for the skills, the attack speed, and I do use some of that lightning res. Attack speed is just great on a this pure charge strike setup, and also the skills, more damage. Now, I checked the calculator and I need just 11 more. It was either 10 or 11 more attack speed to hit the next breakpoint, and I still need to farm a socket quest for this Andy's Visage. Oh yeah, and that's another thing. I need a socket quest for this Vampire Gaze. You would either, depending on the breakpoints you're hitting, like if you're using a treachery or not, that's another thing you could consider as a treachery. But I've just had my Merc die too many times before the Treachery gets a chance to proc for me to want to use Treachery over Fortitude, to be honest. I mean, I've seen Treachery builds that can work quite well, so I'm not, like, knocking it, but I just prefer to use Fortitude. So in here, like, depending on if you're using a Tretch or not, you would maybe want an IAS Jewel in here, or a Chamrune. I don't have a Chamrune on my single-player pluggy here, so I might just put an IAS Jewel in here. I'd have to look at the breakpoints, but I still need to farm up the socket quest for that anyway, and this build works out actually quite well on Chaos Player 7 without these two socket quests farmed up for these two helms. Okay, looking at the charms, I'm trying to hit pretty much the highest faster hit recovery breakpoint I can. You could maybe hit another one on top of what I'm already hitting. If you really want to, you could put a Shale Rune in the helm for FHR again. You're going to want to get, usually anyway, large or grand charms with items to hit breakpoints like Run, Walk, and Hit Recovery, also with a lot of mana on them, like these two, for aforementioned reasons. I use, like I mentioned, did I mention this already? A bow on Switch. Alright, so that's the gear, really. You could definitely consider, since this isn't a Magic Find focus build, you can definitely consider replacing the Skeets with another Javelin Spear skiller. I don't have another Javelin skiller, so I'm just going with the Geeds. Maybe I should just replace this with a Life skiller, something with, say, 44 to life. I think I have one of those. Alright, to look at the skills now. Nothing in here, since this is purely Charge Strike focused. I get stun locked a lot when I use these. These are great if you don't have a Storm Shield, I would say. But also, I just lose a lot of damage per second over a long period of... If you're considering damage per second over a long period of time when I'm using these. If you're playing on hardcore, you probably want to use them. And you would probably also want to get a Valkyrie. Just sacrificing a fair bit of damage. But you would... This build... I do die very rarely on this build, but it can happen. So if you're playing hardcore, I would get these and a decent leveled Valkyrie. Okay, the rest of my skill points, other than Penetrate and Critical Strike... Well, actually, let me just mention, I get Penetrate on this build so that I can hit with the physical damage more. So I'm getting more attack rate. I'm hitting with the physical damage more often to proc my Mana Steal and Life Steal from the Chains of Honor more often. So that's why I have a point there. And I'm trying to... I use the rest of my skill points to get the highest damage Charge Strike I possibly can. Which, it's pretty decent, as you'll see in Chaos here. Just max Charge Strike, max all of its synergies. And don't worry about anything else except for these two, unless you're playing on hardcore, is what I would do. If you have really low tier gear, then you would maybe want to get a Valkyrie anyway. But this build is intended for decently geared players already. This isn't really a build you would make if you're just starting out on pluggy. Kind of like a Travancore Sorceress. If you're earlier in your single player, like if you're using Go Mule or Pluggy, or you're on ladder and you're really early in ladder, you would probably just make a Fury build over this. But my argument for using this build is going to be as follows. We're going to go in Chaos and see how this build functions on P7. Okay. So you're going to see here why I want to use Enigma, why I might want to use Enigma, why you might want to use Enigma even on this build, is because your Merc will straggle behind for every little enemy, pretty much, and the Conviction Aura makes a huge, huge difference, and obviously you need it for, you pretty much exclusively, or strictly need it for lightning immunes. So if you can have an Enigma, and you can work out how to make up the resistances that you get from, or that you have to make up from not using Chains of Honor. Say if you're using a Griffin's and you can get a decent teleport breakpoint, then having an Enigma, you can position your Merc much easier. And you see my Merc is backtracking here to these other enemies, so I have to backtrack and get him to move forward. Now what I'll do rarely, and I might show this off here, depending on what happens. Depending on how much your Merc gets sidetracked, you might want to stick a teleport down, TP scroll down back to town, just to position your Merc. Just because it gets that annoying sometimes, which is kind of the argument for trying to make an Enigma work. And I just got mana burned, I think. Yeah, there we go, that guy was mana burn. That's usually not an issue. Let's see here. Alright. The way I have the gear set up, I don't really have to drink that many potions, but if I get mana burned, then obviously that changes the story. And it becomes somewhat of an issue. So, what I do is I just occasionally drink a mana potion. It's usually like once every couple minutes even. And I'll just occasionally pick a mana potion up as I might walk by one. Almost like that. Also, you want your Merc next to you to kill those Stormcasters quickly. And make sure to keep up on your bow, because that affects your mana regeneration also. Plus, when you come across Lord Desace and Infector of Souls, if you don't have bow and they spawn with some really crazy mods, they're going to kill your Merc probably, unless you have amazing gear. And this is what you're seeing right here is what we call a hard monster roll. The first time I tried to record this, it actually was a lot easier. I didn't get all these mana burn mobs and get amp damage curse on my character constantly. Okay. But you see, even the lightning immunes will get knocked over pretty fast using this build on P7 in Chaos here. Just the most important couple of things when you're playing this build is just to keep up on your mana a little bit. It doesn't take a lot when you're using the gear I'm using, like Mana Steel Ring and charms with high plus mana on them, but to also keep your bow up. So right here we're about to come across Infector of Souls. You're either going to want to keep up on your bow, activated every so often, or actually just activate it right before Lord Desace and Infector of Souls, because they're going to be the toughest things about this, especially Infector of Souls. Although I haven't really ever died to him, and my Merc has only died like twice here to Infector. If he gets a really hard roll, then it can be kind of a pain in the butt. But we're just going to go forward here. And you see, I mean, I'm on player 7 here, but I'm just kind of blowing through everything because of the overpowered nature of Charged Strike. So, yeah, I mean, I'm just 1 to 2 shotting almost everything. That's my argument for using this build over a Fury build. Now, I saw one build on YouTube where this guy was using a perfect faceted Griffins, a 2020 shield, and a quad faceted, excuse me. Oh, here we go. The seal's trolling me again. There we go. Yeah, he was using a quad faceted Jeweler's Halberg of the Whale. You wouldn't really get any of those items in single player. To be honest. I mean, just try and get a hold of a Jeweler's Monarch of Deflecting, for instance. I mean, you could make a 20/20 shield and just a regular Force-Ocketed Monarch. That's always an option. But getting a faceted Griffins and a Jeweler's, well, really, a Jeweler's Elite Armor of the Whale is really not that easy in single player anyway. If you're on Battle.net, then go ahead, make like some ridiculous 13k charge strike damage builds with 5,000 top end fury damage. That's what that guy had in the video. I'll link it in the description, of course, since I'm mentioning it so much. And there we go. So let's see how much trouble Big Bad Diablo gives us with this build. You don't really need bow. You don't really need bow for Diablo in pretty much every case. He's pretty much never going to give you much trouble at all. But yeah, that was the Charge Strike build, pure Charge Strike build. I hope you liked that. Let me know your criticisms, feedback, and so forth in the comments. I had fun making this build. I find it to be a lot of fun playing through Chaos on this thing. So yeah, talk to you guys later.